real desire for the mission field. Then he came back to the States, did some more work in the church, and after, I think a couple of years after that trip, God called him to the mission field. And I have personally been praying for several months now for these students who are going on this trip. Now, we want them to go and have a good time. We want them to see another culture, see another part of the world. We want them to be educated. And this trip will give them the advantage and opportunity to do so. But above and beyond that, and having a good time, we want them to have fun, of course. But I've been especially praying that God would sharpen their vision and that they would see a world without Jesus Christ and a need to get the gospel to people beyond the shores of this country. And I've been praying that God would raise up out of this mission team those who would surrender because of a broken heart for a world lost in sin and in need of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, I've been, yes? All right, thank you, Tig. And it's been wonderful the way these students have worked, and been wonderful the way that you have responded to help them. And they are grateful, and so am I, for the financial support you've given them. We won't be able to reap the benefits until years from now when we see what God's going to do in the lives of these students. Now, if you will, open your Bibles to the book of Ephesians in chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6. I want to talk to you some more tonight about the family and about the home, and particularly about children. And if you will, let's just see something here. And I'd like for you to notice some verses we've already considered in the book of Ephesians in chapter 5. But Ephesians chapter 5, then we'll pay more attention to chapter 6 and verse 4. But in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 22, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands. So there is a wife's responsibility to her husband to submit to her husband. But then there is a reciprocal. Do you know what I mean by reciprocal? Reciprocal means to pay back. To reciprocate means to give back. So the wife has a responsibility, but God has arranged it in the home so that for every action there is to be a reaction. And the wife's action is to be submissive. The husband's reaction to that is found in verse 25. Husbands, love your wives even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Then in chapter 6 and verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Now there is the responsibility of the wife to submit, but there is a reciprocal responsibility from the husband back to the wife. And he is to love her. So the wife reciprocates with submission, and the husband reciprocates with love for her. Then it comes to the children, their responsibility. Children, you obey. So there's a reciprocal responsibility of children toward parents, and it is one of obedience. But parents then have a reciprocal responsibility to children, and that's found in verse 4. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. So children are to reciprocate toward parents with obedience, but parents, particularly fathers, are to reciprocate to children to make certain that they do not cause their children to be provoked to wrath. Now that word provoke there means to exasperate, or maybe a word that we use more common today, frustrate. Fathers, do not frustrate your children. Do not exasperate your children to wrath. Now the word wrath means anger, of course. But in this particular instance, the word wrath here has an anger with another shade of meaning with it, and it means resentful anger. So fathers, Do not exasperate your children to the point where they are frustrated and they, with resentment, get angry at you, fathers. Now, I would like for you to think with me tonight on 12 things, and don't get scared to death because I'll go through these quite rapidly, but 12 ways that I believe it's possible for children to be exasperated to resentful anger. Now, this sermon is not particularly mine. I've added a little bit to it, but this is somebody else's, but I'm going to share it with you because it's good. Now, here are some of the ways that fathers and parents may frustrate or exasperate their children and make them resentfully angry. First of all, by overprotection. Children can be driven to resentful anger and frustration and resentment because they feel smothered and confined. I think I've witnessed that, and I'm certain you have too, where parents were so protective, children were not given the opportunity to do anything. And children can become exasperated and frustrated to the point where parents stifle and kill all of their enthusiasm because parents confine them and do not let them feel free enough to do some of the things that are even legitimate and right. I have known parents who would not let their children play with neighbor children because the children in the neighborhood were not Christians. Well, I'm going to tell you one thing right now. I know some Christian children I wouldn't want my children to play with. And I think that you can exasperate your children to the point of frustration and cause them to be resentfully angry towards you if you take such a hard-line attitude. Now, I don't see anything wrong with letting children play with children in the neighborhood. Your children play in the neighborhood. After all, they're there. And sometimes the neighbors get the idea that you think you're better than they are. And that puts added pressure on the children because the children know that the neighbors and the neighbor children think that you think that you are better than they are, and that puts children under pressure and causes them to be frustrated because of your overprotection. Then there's another problem, and that is the problem of favoritism. Boy, I remember one time, if I was to call the name of this pastor, he pastored in this community for a long time, and he had a good ministry here. But I had the opportunity one time to teach his younger brother, and his younger brother really is a basket case. Now, I don't know just how much of it is the brother's fault, how much of it is the parent's fault. But this brother grew up in the shadow of an older brother who was successful and an older sister who was successful. And that younger brother, the baby of the family, grew up thinking that he always had to reach the level that had been achieved by his older brother and sister. And his parents were forever saying to him, "Why don't you do it like your older brother? Why don't you be like your older sister?" We never had any trouble with them. And a child is driven to exasperation and frustration. And inside they seethe with the resentful anger because they believe, fathers and mothers, you're playing favorites, and they are not as good as the older children. Then there's another thing, and that is pushing for achievement. Oh, I'll tell you, I think I've seen this to do damage in a lot of children, where children were pushed to achieve academically, for instance, where if the child didn't bring home an A on a report card, every single subject in every single marking period, the parents would just go bananas. Well, I don't say this to be smart alecky, but my mother never had to worry about that. I never got all A's in my life on a single report card, never one time. I remember one time at Bob Jones University, I made the dean's list. I had 1 A and 4 B's, and that's the closest I ever came to intellectual superiority. And that only happened one time. But now let me tell you something. I hope this is not a cop-out on my part, but I have lived long enough to see that those who so many times get the academic achievements usually wind up the biggest messes the world's ever seen. Now, I don't know whether that's true generally. I'm not just going to preach it strong and hard, but I know some of the fellows when I was in college and even in high school, the boy who walked off with academic achievements in my senior class the year I graduated wound up committing suicide. He was so frustrated. He was raised a Methodist and decided he wanted to be a Catholic priest. Went off and tried the Catholic priesthood for a while, and that didn't work out for him. Then he got married. Then he had a couple of children. One day blew his brains out. But boy, he was there and got all the academic achievement awards at our commencement. And you know, I'm going to tell you something. Just to show you how dumb I was, I didn't even know until that day I sat right there in the Palace Theater in Salem, New Jersey, that there was even such a thing as an academic achievement. I didn't know it. I didn't know that you got awards for good grades. I didn't know it until I sat there and they called this guy by the name of Joe Newsom, and Joe Newsom came and got it. I didn't know they gave awards for that sort of thing. If I'd known it, I probably would have tried a little harder to get it. But then again, probably I wouldn't. But I didn't, I was so dumb. And when they called Joe Newsom for being the smartest guy in the class, I thought, good gravy, I didn't know they did that. Well, that was my childhood. But pushing for achievement. And it causes children sometimes to have no sense of fulfillment and never being good enough. And they never can satisfy. Children get browbeaten all the time. And boy, I'll tell you where I've seen it more than anywhere else is in the field of athletics. Pushing kids to be the best, the ball player, the greatest home run hitter, the greatest touchdown maker, the greatest this and the greatest basketball shooter and all that stuff. I want to tell you something. You push kids too hard and you are going to cause them to be frustrated, and they're going to wind up so many times with a resentful anger about it all. Then there is another thing, and that is discouragement. Never approving, never giving a word of compliment, never giving a word of reward, never giving an honor. And all children need to be patted on the back. Children need to be given some kind of recognition when they have achieved it. I remember one time, I told you that I've never told this public. I guess I've told it privately on different occasions. But my mother remarried after my father died, and I was 10 years old, and we moved into a house, moved out of the house where I was born and raised till I was 10, moved into this house with that husband of hers, and they started cleaning up the house, and he was out in the backyard, and I was out there with him. I was 10 years old, a wheelbarrow, and I was pushing his wheelbarrow, and I wanted to please him so badly. I mean, I worked and worked and worked. And I never will forget it, and it left a mark on my life. He never said a word. He never said you did a good job. And I was trying my best to please him. Then, as I get a little older, I realized there was no way I could please him. But it left something on my life. And I want to tell you something. It smoldered there in my heart for years, and I had to ask God to get it out of my heart, because that man provoked me to resentment and anger. After a while, I got to the place where I felt sorry for him. And I pitied him. And God helped me to get that out of my heart. But no matter what I would do, there was never any compliment, only discouragement. And I ask you, parents, be on your guard against that. Do not discourage your children. When they excel, tell them you're proud of them. Tell them you're happy with them. When they fail, reassure them. This is just a setback temporarily. And reassure them that you support them and you're going to help them and you're going to see to it as much as is within your ability to help them to achieve and to excel the next time. Then there's another thing that causes children to be provoked by parents to this resentful anger, and that is blame. Parents do not have certain things because of the children. I know of parents who have told their children, well, we'd have a new car if you weren't in the family. Or we'd have a better home if we never had you. And children are driven to exasperation and frustration, and they have a resentment and an anger toward parents because parents have laid the blame on them. And if the child had never been born, the parents have given the child to understand that things would be much better. And they grow up feeling unwanted. They feel that they're in the way. They feel they're unnecessary, and they're not a contributor to the family, but rather they are a barnacle on the family's wheel of progress, so to speak. Then another thing, they don't let them grow up. Parents frustrate children and exasperate them to a resentful anger because they don't let the children grow up. They keep them babies all their lives. They don't let the child express how he feels about certain things. And when the child does try to say something, parents give every evidence and indication that they're not listening because what the child has to say is not important. And they regard the child as still a baby. Now I want to tell you, you can get away with that for a while, but when your children get a little older, you better start listening to them. Because they do have definite opinions. And you will be a wise parent if you will listen carefully. Now you don't have to agree, but at least listen. And especially when they get a little older and they start expressing themselves, allow them to express themselves vocally. Don't let them pitch a fit. Now I want to stress that. A child ought to be given to understand he can say anything he wants to say, provided he says it with the right attitude. But there's nothing to be said, nothing to be accepted on the part of the parents if it's body language. You know, body language is when you throw yourself on the floor and kick and jump and squall and holler and all that stuff. There was a fellow at Bob Jones by the name of Randy Pyfram. He told me that he saw a lesson that he'll never forget. He had a sister about 12, 13 years old who all of her life, he was from Baghdad, Florida. I always remember Baghdad, Florida. But he said he had a sister one time who, whenever she couldn't get her way, she would just flop on the floor, kick, scream, pull her hair, shake her legs, pound the floor, and her parents would just stand there frustrated, didn't know what to do with her. And they let her get away with it. That's the first mistake they did, let her get away with it. One day, he said the parents were so distraught over this, didn't know what to do, and the father told the girl, she's about 14 years old, she's going to do this. Then boy, she just flopped on the floor, started kicking her feet and shaking her fist and rolling around, screaming and pulling her hair, beating on the floor and everything. And so the father just stood there and let her run down for a little bit. And when she got through, he reached over and got a belt and said, all right, start it up again. She said, laying there on the floor, said, what do you mean? He said, I mean, start kicking and start squalling and start pulling your hair and start screaming. Start it up again. She said, no, I'm done. He said, oh, no, you're not. He hauled off and whacked her with that belt, said, you keep on going, and you're going to squall and kick your heels and have a fit so long as I want you to. And every time she stopped, he whipped her. Till after a while, she was just bawling and said, Daddy, I'm done. He said, oh, no, you're not. You're going to do it some more. And he just laid on her and whip her some more. And she'd kick and squall. Till after a while, that was broken. She never pulled that trick again. But now I'm telling you this. No body language like that. Children, when they want to express themselves, and a lot of times they express themselves without even using words, throwing themselves on the floor, kicking and screaming and squalling and having a tizzy and a fit, they're sending a message to you. You don't accept that kind of a message. You listen to any kind of a message that they'll sit down and just talk to you and be reasonable. We don't know that. But now this resentful shrugging and shaking and jerking around. Oh, no, none of that stuff. No. But let them grow up and listen to them. Now, here's another thing that causes children to be resentful, and that is neglect. Neglect. Children are neglected by parents too many times because parents demonstrate they're too busy to take the time to be with the children, to listen to the children. They're not interested in those things which the children are interested in. Oh, I tell you the truth, I'm a little ashamed of myself as we were growing up. As my children were growing up, I was so involved in the work of God, and had my heart on it and everything. And if I failed in any area, of course I failed in several areas, but I'm sure I failed here. And that was my own neglect of my children, neglecting to try to get interested in what they were interested in. If I had the time to go over again, I would correct a whole lot of things here. I would try to be a little more interested and concerned about some of those things. And another thing that I'm sure that I caused my children to be frustrated about is I expected them to be automatically interested in the things that I was interested in. But it doesn't always work that way. You understand? It doesn't always work that way. And sometimes I would get frustrated because they didn't have on their mind the same thing I had on my mind. And then I'd fuss at them and chew them out because they weren't thinking about the thing that was on my mind. Well, of course, now I look back and I realize that was a foolish demand to put on children. Of course, they weren't considering what I thought was important. They weren't thinking about the things I was thinking about. They were thinking what children were thinking about. I would be so busy doing something, they'd do something else, and I would turn to them and say, "Don't you understand that Daddy this and Daddy that?" Well, of course they didn't, I thought they would, but they didn't, and I'm ashamed and embarrassed of that to this day. So you can neglect your children by being too busy to take time with them, not showing interest in the things that they're interested in. Then bitter words. Oh, bitter words. I told you about the fellow who I had a little problem here in the church. He got mad at me. We got a history here in our church. And we had a fellow one time, years and years ago, we used to have business meetings back in those days. And back in 1961, 62, somewhere like that, out of the clear blue sky, a fellow in a business meeting stood up and said, "I think we ought to have, the church ought to build a house for the pastor." Now listen, I didn't know he was going to mention it. I had no knowledge it was even going to come up in this business meeting. The fellow did it on his own. And that caused some resentment on the part of some of our people. At that time, my wife and I were living on Walden Road, 6540 Walden Road, little house, 2-bedroom house, had no basement. And I told you before, we lived there 7 years, and for 7 years, we would put our 4 children, only had 4 at that time, Judy, Todd, Tim, and Dave, and we'd put 2 of them in each of the bedrooms, and we had an old hide-a-bed. Now, I'm not kidding you. I bet that hide-a-bed was 50 years old when we got it. It came with the house. The people said, "We'll let you have the hide-a-bed." I know now why they said they'd let us have the hide-a-bed. They didn't want to haul the stinking thing out of there. So it went with the house, but it was a good thing for us. And it had that old style upholstery on it, It looked like something Grandma used to wear. And so you haul that thing out, and we'd open that. We'd put the children to bed, and we'd stay up a little bit after they went to bed. Then we'd go open up that hide-a-bed. Then we'd go in, and she'd get one, I'd get the other. We'd haul 2 of them out of the bed we were going to sleep in, and we'd put them in that hide-a-bed and cover them up. And then we'd go crawl in the bed. We just took them out, and we did that for 7 years every night. Well, somebody said in the business meeting, said, it'd be nice to think if the pastor had a home, a nice house, and believed the church ought to build it for him. And some folks in the church got resentful over that, and they didn't want that. And I don't know why. I really don't know why. But I know one thing, those who got mad at it, all lived in nicer homes than we did. All their homes were nicer than the one we had. And I don't know whether there's any jealousy involved there. But the one fellow, we had a business meeting, and he got so mad, and he got a little frustrated, and he walked out of the meeting, and he said to some of the fellows sitting on the back when we were over here in this building, and he called them something like cowards or something like that. I forget what it was now, but he had some nasty name. And there's a story behind that guy. I walked across a plowed field to try to win that guy to the Lord. One Sunday after, I'd been over to his house, talking to him several times about the Lord, trying to win him to Christ. And I came home one Sunday after church, and sat down and ate our meal. And after I got through eating, I told my wife, I said, "I can't stand it. I'm going to go see that guy, see if I can't win him the Lord." And I went to his house. His wife said he's out there plowing. So I walked across the field, got him off the tractor, and led him to Christ. And he got baptized and joined a church. And he came regularly and faithfully for a while. And then we had this business meeting. And I don't know, to this day, I don't know what caused him to feel as resentful as he did about somebody bringing up to build us a house. Well, make a long story short, he's the fellow, if you remember, I told you sometime after that. One night, my wife and I were sleeping in the summertime. I heard this bam, bam, bam on the door, And I went to the front door, and here were these 2 guys And I could see there's dark silhouettes just outside. Boy, I didn't know it was 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. I didn't know who in the world it was. And calling me by name, saying, come out there. And then I heard this groaning. Now, this is that bad, even worse. And I thought, what in the world? I'm going to go out there and they're going to jump me and beat the daylights out of me. So I'm not kidding you. I doubled my fist and walked toward the door because I didn't know what was coming. I was going to make up my mind, open that door. If they made a beeline for me, I was going to hit first, ask questions later. And I meant it. I really was. I was ready for bloodshed. So walked toward the door, and the guy said, hey, preacher, come here. We need you. And I thought, yeah, you trying to get me outside to beat my brains out. So, and all I had just a little hook, a little hook on the screen door. They could have jerked that off any time. But then I looked through the screen door between these two fellows. I saw a form out there on the front lawn just rolling around on the grass. And that was all this groaning and moaning was coming from. So I walked up there to the door and I said, what is it? And they said, so-and-so. And they called this fellow by name. So that's him out there on the floor, out there on the ground. Well, this is the fellow that got so mad at me. And about getting to church. Church get me a house. And he's a fellow walked out and called some of these fellows cowards. And they said they can't find his twin boys. And they asked me to come over here to come get you to help us get those boys. So I walked out on the front lawn there where we lived, 6540 Walden Road, and I bent over this guy. And he's rolling around the floor, just beside himself. And finally he rolled over toward me, looked up and saw me, reached over and grabbed my legs. I was kneeled down and grabbed me right around the leg. He said, oh, preacher, preacher, preacher. Now this is what he said. He said, I need somebody who can get a hold of God. And he said, I know you can. Will you ask God to give me back my boys? Well, I didn't know it, but the little fellows he had twin boys, and they had been reported lost early that evening. And this was on about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I went over to his house. Man, I got over his house. There were state policemen. There were Oakland County Sheriff's deputies there. They had the neighborhood, and they were going, holding hands, going all over that territory, looking, great big long lines of men and boys searching for this. They had dogs out there. They had I remember when I drove up there, they had the Oakland County Sheriff's Marine Division, had a boat there, and they'd been dragging some of the lakes around where they lived. Well, about 6 o'clock in the morning, those boys showed up at the porch of somebody's house way on down the road. Well, this was when I-75 was being built. And these boys had gone down into I-75 and had followed it, and it got dark, and they crawled up into a culvert and fell asleep. Then when the sun came up, they woke up and looked around to see where they were and saw a house and knocked on the door. And so the woman called the police because she'd heard about them being missing. But you know what caused those boys to walk up I-75? Those little boys, when their daddy came home from work that evening, they got excited about something, wanted him to do something, and they irritated him, and he said, get lost. Get out of my sight. I don't even want to see you. And I think he added, ever again. So they figured, well, if he doesn't want to see us ever again, so they just took off. Bitter words. Children can be frustrated by sarcasm. Cut children down. Humiliate them, belittle them. I tell you, I have been in homes where I have felt so sorry for children because parents just belittle them, make them small. I'm going to tell you something. You are a pretty cheap, small toad yourself if you try to cut down somebody who's younger and smaller than you are. I mean, to me, that's one of the most loathsome things you can do. Cut down somebody, belittle them, and humiliate them and intimidate them. Well, bitter words. Then inconsistency. Oh, you've heard me say that so many times, but inconsistency drives children to be exasperated. Oh, my soul and body. Inconsistency, especially about spiritual things. What's your priorities? Is church attendance a priority? I tell you, I'm positive children get a stronger message from parents from inconsistency than probably every other area in their life. And when parents talk about, yes, they love Jesus Christ, and then children see they won't even go to church. They won't put forth any special effort. I've seen parents weep tears trying to bring children back, and children have told me in private, said, Pastor, don't trust those tears because they don't mean business. I've had children tell me, said, Pastor, I've seen these before. And it calls them to resentful anger. It's just a matter of boasting. I've been around it, and you have too, haven't you? Where some parents boast so on their children, just brag on the children and embarrass the children. Because the children know it's not true. The children themselves know what mother and daddy are saying about them to impress people about them. They know that their boasting is not founded, not grounded in actual fact. And children get embarrassed, and they get to the place sometimes. Listen, I remember years ago, I had a child tell me and said, I wish Daddy would stop that. It embarrasses me. And boy, later on, I saw that boy, he eventually got to a place where he just absolutely had no confidence in his daddy whatsoever on this business, just boasting, bragging on the children too much when the children knew that it wasn't true. And you know why sometimes parents boast so on children? They're not really boasting on the child, but they're boasting on the parent behind the child. Because they're boasting, saying, look what I've produced, you know. And children can see through that. They can see many times that it's not really an honest boast. It's not a legitimate pride, but it is something that is, what do you call it? Well, I don't know the word for it. Well, I'm not even going to try to think of the word now, but trying to get the compliment yourself. What is it? That's close enough, Jim. I'll take it. Egocentric, Jim says. I'm not sure Jim even knows what that means, but all right. And then the last thing I got here, this may go along with boasting. With inconsistency, but it's two-faced. Parents that are two-faced. So sweet, so nice to their children in front of people, and then when the people leave, treat the children like dirt and like dogs. And children know that's phony. I remember one time walking up on a house. I didn't do it deliberately. It just happened that way. And when I went in there, it was obvious that mother was having a terrible time. And I mean, she was slinging stuff and hollering and yelling and screaming to the place where I thought, well, I'll come back when it cools down a little bit. And I thought, no, I'm here. I knocked on, and she was fussing at the children. Oh, she was just giving them the business. I knocked on the door, and boy, right away, the commotion calmed down. And I went to the door. They invited me in, and Mother was just oozing and dripping with all kinds. You would have thought it was heaven on earth in that house. And so I left. But I did a dirty thing. I slipped back. And I mean, no sooner had I left, and they thought I was gone, and I'm telling you, it started all over again. And those children proved out years later were frustrated and exasperated by that two-faced stuff. Well, these are just some of the things that I give to you as warnings, because the Bible says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. But fathers, don't exasperate your children to the point where they will become resentfully angry. You got that? Now,
before I close this, and nobody here but us, anybody got any questions? What do you got a question there, Nancy? I'm sorry, Kathy. Oh, God, give them to you again. 1, overprotection. 2, favoritism. 3, pushing achievement. 4, discouraging. You with me so far? 5, blame. Got that? 6, don't let them grow up. 7, neglect. 8, bitter words. 9, inconsistency. 10, boasting. 11, two-faced. Jim, you're going to get this fixed here some of these days. Did I say 12? Yes. Let's see if I can think of one real fast. Yeah. Well, I want to tell you something. I failed there too. I have a tendency to want to make sure that my children get the point. And in order to get the point, I just stay on it for a long, long time. And I've told you this before, but one time, I was going after Tim this particular time. And I was going over the same thing and over, because I just figured he didn't have enough intelligence to get it the first time. I had to give. And really, I just want to make sure they got it. And I never will forget old Tim. I don't know how old he was, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. He looked at me and tears in his eyes, had kind of an exasperated look on his face. He said, "Okay, Dad, I got the point." And I tell you, it embarrassed the fire out of me. It really did. It made me so embarrassed, I wanted to die. I thought, oh, good night. Of course he got the point. I didn't give the kid enough credit for being able to get it. But he spoke to me, and it cut to my heart. He said, "Okay, Dad, I got the point." And I figured, well, I might as well shut up. Ain't no need to say it anymore. But another reason why I did it is because I was so exasperated myself, I didn't want to shut up. Right? And you just keep on and haranguing, kind of let it out, Harangutan, as a harangutan. I'll tell you one thing right now, we're going to close this right now because my wife's getting in on it, calling me on a harangutan. All right. Well, hey, now listen, these are good things to ponder, right? Amen. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, don't provoke your children. Let's ask God to give us wisdom, raise these children to honor Christ. Now let's stand and pray.